Hello, Off-Season Will here again. Today we're going to be looking at the 5th of 31 2019 NHL Draft recaps. And we're going to be looking at the Detroit Red Wings today. Now, the Detroit Red Wings surprised me and quite a few other people by jumping at the chance to take German defenseman Moritz Cider at 6th overall. Let me preface this by saying that I like Moritz Cider. He's big, he's really mobile, he has offensive flashes that are nice, and making an IIHF World Championship team at his age is a really notable achievement. However, this is a player that I just did not see have top 6 talent in this year's draft. I felt there was a very clearly defined top 11 or 12 that really felt like a step up from the rest of the draft, and Cider was not part of that group. I think it's possible he turns into a very useful two-way top 4 minutes-eating defenseman. He's also a player that I feel like you could trade down to get, and if you're worried about someone else taking him at say 6, 7, 8, or 9, you probably let them take that risk and you take a lower risk, higher ceiling player like say a Cole Caulfield or a Trevor Zegras. Detroit also ended up drafting a ton of defensemen in the draft this year, so I'm not really sure what their end goal is here taking Cider at 6, but if you really like him, you could mold him into something really interesting. I think he's going to require a lot of patience to refine his really raw game, but there are nice tools there, especially with his combination of size, physicality, and skating. I just really am not sold on the idea of him at 6. Following that up at 35, they took another big defenseman in Antti Tuomisto. I really like Antti Tuomisto. At 35, he might be a bit of a swing, but I know there are people out there who really like him here. I think he's a really nice all-around defenseman with a nice big shot from the point. There's a lot of potential to like here. He crossed 25% involvement in the Finnish Junior League, which is not a joke, and when you add that to his size and his under 18 that was pretty good, I think there's an interesting project defenseman here. He might need a bit of patience, but the Detroit Red Wings can afford to be patient as they rebuild, and they have plenty of prospects in the cupboard to choose from, and Tuomisto's a good addition. With another pick in the second round, they went with Robert Mastrosimone from the Chicago Steel. I really liked what I saw out of Mastrosimone. He's a nice, feisty, skilled offensive center. I'm not sure there's quite enough there to really round out his game into a real impact NHLer, but he's an interesting project, and he certainly was well worth the look in the second round. He's got a lot of offensive talent, and I found that he did improve quite a bit over the course of this season, so I'm very interested to see how he does in college moving forward. Also in the second round, the Detroit Red Wings took a big swing on shooting offensive defenseman Albert Johansson. I found his under 18 a little bit underwhelming, and there's decisions that he's made that really make me question his upside, but he really likes to shoot. He's a shifty skater, and I really like the fact that in the Super Elite he was over 25% involvement, and I think at this pick he was good value. Judging by who was available, I might have looked in another direction, but at this range, I think he's a really interesting bet for the Detroit Red Wings, and I think they could go a long way with him. The Red Wings followed up that pick at 66 with Alban Gurova, who I think is one of the more underrated players to come out of this draft. He's a player that I thought could sneak into the first round, and for the Detroit Red Wings to get him in the third, I think that's a great pickup. He's a feisty offensive center who pushes the envelope really well, but he brings really nice skating ability and really nice skill, and I thought he was really underrated. He will need to keep a lid on the amount of time that he stays in the penalty box, and he will need to refine his game and stay calm a bit more often in order to be effective more often, but I do think it's a really interesting pick for the Red Wings, and I'm a fan. At 97, they went with Ethan Phillips, who for Sioux Falls I saw was a really interesting, skilled offensive player, and there's kind of a trend here. They like these feisty offensive players, and I think he fits that bill really nicely. I don't know what his upside is, and I think there were better swings to take where they took him, but it's an interesting pick nonetheless, and he did stand out a few times with the Sioux Falls Stampede when I watched them play. With their 7th pick in the draft, the Detroit Red Wings went with a really nice analytical case in Cooper Moore, another defenseman. He played in a lesser-known high school prep program, so I'm really hesitant on upside, but at 128, I think it's a perfectly worthwhile bet to make. He was well over 25% involvement on a pretty okay prep school team, and going to college, we'll see where he goes. He's an interesting bet, he produces well offensively, and I really have nothing bad to say about this pick for Detroit. Following that, the Detroit Red Wings picked up Elmer Soderblom, a player I really didn't pay too much attention to. I didn't find him particularly notable at the under 20 level, didn't find him particularly notable at the under 18s. Really just not sure where he goes, but he certainly is a very big defenseman, and NHL teams love size, so who knows. You can't really argue at 159, but this is not a player I probably would have looked at if I'm the Detroit Red Wings, especially when you consider they've already got guys like Thome and Cider who have a little bit more offensive flair to them than someone like Soderblom does on paper at least. With their second last pick, the Detroit Red Wings picked Gustav Berglund. He's a total wild card. He performed really nicely at the under 18 level, scored a lot of goals for a defenseman with 13 in 28 games, so we'll see where he goes. You can afford to be patient with guys in this range, and over time he might improve. He hasn't really been all that great at the super elite level, but players at the under 18 level who are defensemen and score like he does, it's an interesting project, and I'll be interested to see where he ends up. And with their last pick in the draft, the Red Wings went to Russia and picked Kirill Tutyev, a player who went undrafted last year but performed extremely well on the MHL's Auto Yekaterinburg team. He absolutely shredded the Russian under 18 league last year, so we'll see where he goes. The MHL is a really hard league to judge, and Ekaterinburg was in a weaker conference, but Tutyev put up almost 4 points per 60 this season, which is particularly notable, although he was older for that league. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, and you can hold on to his rights for quite a while. So the Red Wings did pick a player who does produce and does play with a bit of skill in Russia, so I think there's an interesting project here, especially when you consider where he was a year ago. After that pick, the Detroit Red Wings picked up Carter Gielander, and I mean, goalie's late, who knows. Junior A goaltender, we'll see what happens. I really don't know what to say. Goaltenders are strange. So if you've watched Scouching reports, we're going to transfer over the rating system, where the number's going to indicate the overall potential I feel in the draft class as a whole, and the letter indicates the likelihood of reaching that potential with that class. And with the Detroit Red Wings, I'm going to give them a 1D. They stepped up to the podium and took the biggest swing in the first round on Moritz Cider. Really not a player I would have picked at 6, but I could see how I could live to regret those words. He's big, physical, rangy, has some nice offensive pieces to him, but I really felt there was another class of player available above a Moritz Cider, especially when you look at the defenseman they went with later on in the draft. Tuomisto's a big swing at 35, but it's a perfectly reasonable one. And getting Mastro, Simone, Johansson, and Gurova back to back is a great haul. Of those first 5 picks, I think they're all decent bets when you look at them as a whole. There's a long way to go with some of these players, and Detroit might need to be a bit patient, but considering where they are as a franchise, they can afford to be patient and let these guys develop, because I think that over time these guys will get a lot better. And with names like Cooper Moore and Kirill Tutyev, these are long-term projects that could turn into something really interesting. So with that, we're going to end the Detroit Red Wings and move on to the New York Islanders in the next video. If you liked the video, you could click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could support us on Patreon, where you get access to early access to videos, merchandise discounts, and plenty of other goodies. Or you could buy some merch at the Scouchwear shop. All the links are in the description below. So that's it, and be sure to tune in for the next video where we look at the New York Islanders.